Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 5 in palette week, where every single day for 7 straight days I am posting some sort of palette themed content, and today I'm going to let you know we're going to be sharing every single eyeshadow palette that I have reached for so far this year. There are 108 of them if you don't count the palette that is currently on my eyes, which is the Cosmic Beauty Undergrowth palette. This is not included in today's video. This arrived last night and I put it on today, and I had already put my list together. But I have 108 eyeshadow palettes out of 162 eyeshadow palettes that I have reached for so far this year, meaning that I have reached for 66.6, which is about 2/3 of my palette collection, meaning that 1/3 remains untouched, and we have only 1/4 of the year left. Now I do have all of my unused eyeshadow palettes that will be coming tomorrow, so if you're curious about the unused portion of my collection, stay tuned for tomorrow's video. But today I have all of the palettes that I have reached for. I'll let you know which palettes they are, how many times I've reached for them, and that is it. Yep, that's it. I did straighten my hair this morning and immediately put it up because it is still September, close to October, days away from October, right? Yeah, less than a week away from October. This time next week it will be October, and it's 80 degrees here in the MN state today, so we're hot. Anyway, you guys, if you're interested in seeing which eyeshadow palettes I have reached for this year, stay tuned. First, if you have yet to subscribe to my channel and you like project planning content, palette themed content, or just chit-chatting about makeup, I'd love if you'd consider subscribing before moving on. And other than that, let's jump into the video. Okay, I know it will make it so much more interesting if I show the palette, and a part of me just like doesn't want to grab every palette, but then I also don't want to like be hunting through the internet and posting pictures of every palette, so I guess we'll take all the palettes out. I will note, as I was putting this list together, I definitely was rushing as I put together my unused palette list, so there might be a few palettes today that you see used one time that you'll see tomorrow on my unused palettes. I apologize. Okay, but let's start with, we're gonna go in alphabetical order. So we have the Bella Beauty Bar Secret Garden eyeshadow palette, which I am shocked I've only reached for one time. This is a palette that's new to my collection this year, and I know that the look that I've created using this is this one up here. I will say I have felt and it's my own fault, overwhelmed by the amount of palettes that I've brought into my collection this year. And this one has 25 shades. And for me, in order for me to consider a palette like complete for testing purposes, I have to no pan left behind the palette, meaning that I have to reach for every single shade in the palette at least one time. So I've been trying to get through some other palettes and I just haven't made my way to this one. But I do love greens, especially in the fall time, although some of these greens are a little bit more warm, kind of spring leaning in my opinion. Not that you have to wear your makeup seasonally. I get it, we don't have to do that. So only reach for this one time, but you can bet this will get more uses before the end of the year. All right, I have two ColourPop palettes. So up first, I have the ColourPop Lil Ray of Sunshine eyeshadow palette. I'm not really surprised that this one has only been reached for one time, just because this is an all matte palette and definitely something that is more fall leaning, and we've just entered the fall. So I anticipate this will get more uses before the end of the year. In fact, I would love to no pan left behind this before the end of the year, but as of this moment, only one use on that, as well as my ColourPop Wild Child eyeshadow palette. I will honestly say I'm proud that I've reached for this even just a one time, just because I feel like for some reason this palette gets neglected, even though I absolutely love this palette. This is another one that really kind of screams fall to me, because I do love a warm brown kind of sultry smoky eye in the fall time. So hoping this one will get a little bit more use. And then I also have my Danessa Myricks Groundwork Volume 4 eyeshadow palette, which shame on me, but it is Viking season, and I feel like inevitably I reach for this palette more around the Viking season, because I love reaching for this shade, which I know looks kind of blue on camera, but in person, when it hits the light just right, it kind of has this just perfect Minnesota Vikings purple shift to it, and I love it. So this is a very expensive palette, very special palette. I would hate for this to only be used one time this year, hoping this gets some more use as well. All right, a palette from Dose of Colors that is supposed to self-destruct, meaning I'm supposed to declutter this if I don't reach for it. I can't remember if it's 20 or 25 times this year. We have the Dose of Colors Sassy Sienna palette that I've only reached for one time. Not looking good for this one, although I think I will keep this no matter what. even though I literally never reach for this. From Glamlight, I have the Glamlight Cake palette, which I set aside because I do plan to declutter that, and I honestly don't know where I put it, so I can't find that one right now. Then I also have the Glamlight Ice Cream Dream palette, and I'm very disappointed in myself. I let myself go this summer without reaching for this more frequently, just because this is definitely something that kind of screams more spring summer to me, and I definitely failed to reach for it in the spring summer. But there's also an orange shade that is pumpkin up here, so you know what, Steph, we can still reach for this one. Hoping this gets some more use because I do love this palette. Now this palette was recently rolled into my No Pan Left Behind, or another project for No Pan Left Behind. So this, unless I completely fail at that, which I wouldn't put it past myself, this should get more than just the one use that it currently has. This is the Glamlight Scooby-Doo 2 palette. I literally cannot wait to reach into the blue special shades down here because we love a blue. And then I have quite a few from Glaminatrix. Now this one I've actually had set on my desk because I do plan to No Pan Left Behind it this spooky season. This is the Nocturnal palette. I'm actually so excited about using this palette, but so many new palettes have come into my collection in the last week that I've been trying to actually put review videos up for, and I've had so much fun doing that. So we have the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 6, we have the Bella Beauty Bar Poison Garden, and then I'm now working on the Cosmic Brushes Undergrowth, which the review for this will be coming, review and 3 looks will be coming right after palette week ends. But I also have Bella Beauty Bar Recently De-Influenced and Strange and Unusual that are supposed to be delivered today. So I really do want to reach for this one this weekend though, because I have some fun looks in mind for this palette. This one will be used more than just the one time it currently has been used. And then I also have the Rich Romantic palette from them. I think this is a really beautiful palette. Kind of a shame I didn't reach for this more in the springtime, because these are kind of giving more like romantic spring vibes, or maybe even I'm like February, Valentine's Day. But still, I absolutely love these special shades in this palette, so I hopefully can find some more time to reach for that. And then the Sugar and Spice palette is definitely one that I do feel like I could try and focus on a little bit more this fall winter. I absolutely love the shade Basil down here. I think it's such a beautiful kind of ethereal blue brown shade. Not even blue brown, but just this really beautiful ethereal blue, and I feel like I'm actually really close to pan on this one, so I'd love to kind of focus on this and see if I could hit a pan on this before the end of the year. But as of this moment, this only has the one use. 2 palettes I love from Huda Beauty have only gotten one use. Up first, I have the Huda Rose Quartz, and I will say I definitely want to pull this one out around like the winter time, just because like the shade Cosmic Love Blissful and Moon Magic just feel like a really beautiful ethereal winter look. I think would be so pretty. I actually love this eyeshadow palette, and it's really a bummer that I've only reached for it once. That's what happens when you have too many palettes. And then I have the Huda Mercury Retrograde eyeshadow palette, which is definitely old in my collection. I should pull this out and maybe even just try to like hit a pan. I have only one pan in this palette, but I feel like I'm so close to pan, or could hit pan pretty quickly, in the shade Nebula, which is also kind of like this blue silver periwinkle shade that I love. So maybe I should also try and hit a pan. Maybe I'll set aside, ooh, should I set aside a few palettes and do like a pan those eyeshadows project, but not random, like try and hit a few pans before the end of the year? Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I will do that. What was the other shade that I just had? Oh yeah, Glaminatrix. Okay, maybe I am gonna do that. Keep an eye out for that video. Next up, I have the Menagerie Pastel Pup palette. This is another one, kind of shame on me for not getting more use out of this one in the spring summertime. I feel like this spring summer was like a bit of a whirlwind, because this spring I was like stressed because on my mind was the fact that I had trial for my divorce in the beginning of June, and then like this summer was just such a whirlwind because all I did was focus on like doing fun things in the summer. So I feel like I just wasn't focused on making sure I hit every like spring summer palette in my collection. So this has only gotten one use, is my point. I don't know that this one's gonna get a lot more use before the end of the year, but I do love the shade Snowball, and I actually feel like we could do something like fun and pastel, like a fun pastel winter look. So maybe we'll do that. We'll see. Next up, I have 2 from NARS that I've only reached for once. So I have the NARS Suede 6 pan. I will say I purchased this as a palette to kind of bring traveling with me, and I definitely did not do that this year. I brought with me Tartelette in Bloom quite frequently. So this is something that I easily could reach for, especially on like work days. just haven't found myself reaching for them, so we'll see if that one gets any more use. And then my favorite palette from NARS, I only reached for this once this past probably summer. It's the NARS Summer Solstice. I do think this is a really, really beautiful eyeshadow palette. It is one of my favorite like mainstream brand palettes in my entire collection. I love the lid topper shades in this palette, but unfortunately so far I've only reached for this once. I will say this would be another one that would be really fun to pull out for the fall because of the red here, but as of this moment, only one use. Okay, there are quite a number of Natasha Denona palettes that I've only reached for once. So up first, we have the Natasha Denona Mini Retro, Shame on Me. This is one I should just like leave up here. I should no pan left behind this because I haven't completed it, and it would be a very easy palette to complete that way. I also feel like this is a really beautiful one for either spring or honestly winter as well. I'm gonna put this one up on my desk so I remember to reach for this. Okay, this one is not gonna look like it's original because I have kind of like mixed up some of my Natasha palettes doing like custom palettes, but the Natasha Denona Sunrise, this is what mine currently looks like. I should reach for it, but I'm like, are there any Sunrise shades even in this? I think this shade right here is Laurel from Sunrise. I should use that. Anyway, the original Sunrise, I haven't used a single shade. Whether in this palette or in a custom one in a different palette, I haven't used it. And then same thing with the Natasha Denona Zendo eyeshadow palette. And again, this one does not look like it's original, but I haven't reached for even one shade out of the Natasha Denona Zendo. I also have the Natasha Denona Xenon palette, which I actually reached for just the other day. And I only reached for one shade. I reached for the shade Stellar. I've gotta say, I actually am really wanting to pull this out, not necessarily for the matte shades in this palette, but I think that the like metallic shades in this palette are absolutely stunning, and I want to mix them with some other palettes. Like the shade Cygnus, which is this really deep gray with like a hint of a blue in it, I think is gonna be beautiful with something else. The shade Stellar was such a beautiful like silver inner corner, so I'm actually very excited to pull this out and reach for this more. And then I also have my Natasha Denona Lila palette, which I have only reached for once. This is another palette that I've said I need to use 20 or 25 times this year or it will self-destruct. So we got to get moving and grooving on this one. Now I will say this is currently going in a project to No Pan Left Behind and use it those, I think it's 20 times. So I am hopeful I will actually get the uses that I want out of this one, but as of this moment, we only have one use on Natasha Denona Lila. I just have 4 more palettes in the one use category. So I have the Odin Hella eyeshadow palette, which I have reached for one total time. This is definitely something I do want to get some more use out of before the end of the year, and would be easy to because I love the shade Double-Sided as an inner corner highlight. So if I pull this out and just focus on it, I could definitely get some more use with this. I also have the Odin Stone and Rock eyeshadow palette, which I think is beautiful, but I've mentioned many times, and actually I just ranked my Odin palettes and complained all video long about the Odin matte formula. So I'm excited to pull this one out for the shade like High Spirits. Is one of my favorite greens in my entire collection. Clearly I like green eyeshadow, but I just find the matte formula in this palette very difficult to work with. So sometimes I will avoid this palette, but I definitely think I'll get more use on this before the end of the year. In fact, I also want to reach for Lightheartedness, which is a really beautiful kind of taupey brown shade. Urban Decay Naked Honey, I absolutely want to No Pan Left Behind this fall. I think this is such a fun palette for the fall, and I remember the look that I created with this year. I did use this for more than just one shade, but I have only reached for it one time to create one look. Where am I going with this? Was so beautiful, and I was just reminded as how much I actually really do like this palette. I think this is actually one of Urban Decay's best, so I definitely want to No Pan Left Behind this before the end of the year. And then the final eyeshadow palette with just one use so far this year is my What's Up Beauty Geodes eyeshadow palette, and I'm actually really surprised by this because I reach for this shade Citrine so frequently as an inner corner highlight, or have in years past. Now I will say I was focused on a different yellow earlier this year, so that could be a part of it. But I definitely am interested in No Pan Left Behinding this palette again. So I should set this one out soon too, to get some more use out of it. I believe there are 15 eyeshadow palettes that I've reached for 2 times, so we will get into those next. And up first, I have the Adept Ninhydrin palette. I'm very ashamed that I've only reached for this 2 times, and I absolutely need to make this a focus before the end of the year because I love so many of these shades, but find that I'm not reaching for this much because I'm either going to work throughout the week and I'm not really reaching for these bright colorful shades, or on the weekends I'm usually like testing new palettes to my collection. So I need to focus on this one because I love this palette. And then I also have the Adept Plain Jane Remastered that I have reached for just 2 times this year. I should also pull this one out because I feel like there's a couple of shades in here that I could easily get away with as an inner corner highlight. Or honestly, this is a little bit more muted and something that I do feel like I could do like work appropriate looks still with this eyeshadow palette. So I'm hoping to get some more use on this before the end of the year. Then I have my Cosmic Beauty Neutrals eyeshadow palette, which I have reached for twice. I am still in the testing process with this one, so I know that I'll get more uses on this one before the end of the year, but as of now, 2 uses on this. Next is my Ensley Rain Cosmic Dreamer palette. I swear I reached for this like at least 3 times, but I've only tracked 2 uses with this one. This is obviously another new one to my collection this year, so I am still finishing my testing process and definitely will have more than just the 2 uses before the year ends. I have 2 Natasha Denona minis that I've only reached for twice. I'm actually shocked I've only reached for my mini nude twice just because this is such a staple reach for me. But then I also have my Natasha Denona mini pastel, which I have reached for twice. I have the Nars Stargaze eyeshadow palette, which I have reached for twice, but this did just recently roll into my No Pan Left Behind project. So this one I anticipate hopefully will have more use. And then I also have the Nomad Okavango Safari palette, which I just pulled out actually this week to start using, and I did create 2 looks. So really the only shadows I have left before I complete this No Pan Left Behind is this middle row, which I do plan to do. So I think this will at least get 1 more use before the end of the year. All right, next up I have the Odin's Eye Spring Dragon eyeshadow palette. I had to have reached for this more than 2 times because I did use all of the shades, and I can think of at least 3 looks that I created using this palette. Regardless, I was not impressed with this eyeshadow palette at all. I think the quality in the mattes is really not good. And I like hate to say that. I don't think it's any fault of Judy's. I think the color story is really beautiful, but in terms of the execution of the mattes, I don't know what's happening with Odin's Eye. Palette I love from Odin's Eye, contrast to that, is the Trick or Treat palette, and I obviously plan to use this more this fall season. So I'm very excited to reach for Witch's Brew. This is another one. Oh, I'm gonna set this one aside because Witch's Brew I should be able to hit a pan on before the end of the year. So right now 2 uses. And then I have the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 2 eyeshadow palette, which I have reached for twice. I really do like this palette. I know that there have been quality issues with this palette, but I personally have not experienced any of those. And I continue to think that the Patrick Ta matte formula specifically is one of the easiest to work with that I have tried, and I really enjoy this palette. The final 2 in the 2 category, we have the Viseart Soleil Le Plage eyeshadow palette, which I also can think of like, I'm pretty sure 4 looks that I've used this palette with. So I'm like, okay, clearly we weren't tracking everything right, but I love this eyeshadow palette. You guys know I rave about this palette all of the time. This palette made me want to give Viseart another try, and I definitely still need to pick out like what Viseart palettes I want, or I can wait until one really speaks to me. But I love the color story. This pale yellow shade I think is so pretty. In fact, with this, maybe I should, like, how thick are these pans? I'm like, should I try and hit a pan in one of these shades? I'm definitely not close by any means, but I would love to use like a pale yellow inner corner like the majority of the rest of the year. That'd be fun, right? We'll see if I include this. And then I have the Urban Decay Stoned Vibes eyeshadow palette, which I'm pretty sure both times I reached into this palette, I was just reaching for the shade Tiger's Eye, which is one of my absolute favorites in my collection. I think this is such a unique eyeshadow formula from Urban Decay. I wish they'd do something fun like this again for the holidays. I would absolutely purchase it. And while I think the packaging is quite bulky, I think it's kind of fun as well, and it's a palette that I continue to want to keep in my collection. It's not something I'm ever kind of thinking is on the chopping block. I also really love the shade Meditate, which I'm so close to a pan in Meditate, but it's also like so close to like the edge, and I really do just use my finger with this formula. So I'm like, I don't know if I'm actually that close, but maybe I'll set this one aside too, because I think this one would be fun to focus on. And I also think that this formula is a really fun one for like the holiday times. So hoping this has more than 2 uses before the end of the year. Moving on to the 3 use category, I have 2 palettes from Aether Beauty. So I have the Ambertine Crystal Quad, which I think is just such an easy reach if I'm wanting like dusty purples or a mauve tone look. Obviously not super versatile, but just a very easy reach. And then I also have the Aether Beauty Summer Solstice palette, which I really fell in love with this summer when I was using it. I did No Pan Left Behind this palette, and I really enjoyed the looks that I was able to create with this palette. So I'm very happy to continue to keep this in my collection, and I'm excited to reach for this one again. I don't know if it'll happen this year, but definitely next summertime. Next, I have the Bella Beauty Bar Melted Mattes, which I am still currently in the process of testing. So we'll absolutely reach for this more than 3 times this year, but have only reached into it 3 times as of right now. Then I have the Bella Beauty Bar Poison Garden, which I think I actually missed to use because I definitely created a 4th look after I posted the video that I created because I wanted to use the purple shades. So I think this is actually 4 uses, but clearly I missed the tracking. But anyway, love this palette. If you want to hear a little bit more about this one, I will link the video that I just posted where I review, swatch, compare, and create 3 looks using this eyeshadow palette. But this is such a beautiful one, and I definitely will reach for this more this fall season because I love the color story. I think it's such a fun grungy color story for the fall. Very excited to continue to play with this. Next, I have the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 5 eyeshadow palette. This is the one that launched last holiday. Such a fun, beautiful color story. So many fun things to do with this eyeshadow palette, so I definitely want to focus on this one. And actually, I have found that the Danessa Myricks shadows are a little bit shallow, so I feel like this would be another easy one for me to hit a pan on. I think I might set this aside and try and focus on a shade in this palette as well before the end of the year, and then it'll also help increase my use with this palette as well. Then I have my Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 6, which I also recently posted a review comparison 3 looks with this palette, and I just have a few shadows left to use in this palette before I complete it. I am still in my testing process, so this is another one that will absolutely have more than 3 uses before the end of the year. I have my LH Cosmetics Shimmer Saga eyeshadow palette, which has 3 uses. This is one I feel like I will get more use out of in the fall, sorry, not the fall time, the winter / holiday time, just because they're really fun, sparkly lid topper shades. I do really enjoy having this quad in my collection. And then I also have the Nabla Glitter Lights palette, which I do think I will reach for a few more times before the end of the year. In fact, I was recently thinking of the glitter lights and I was like, oh, I should pull this back out. It's definitely not an everyday reach because they're obviously pressed glitters. They're kind of annoying to use. They're really annoying to take off. But I would like to reach for this a few more times this year. Maybe at least get it to like 5 uses. Next, we have the NARS Afterglow Irresistible eyeshadow palette. I also swear I've reached for this like at least 4 times, but 3, alas, is all that we've tracked. I like this eyeshadow palette. I will say it's a little bit rosier than I prefer, and I feel like I'm just so hooked on the NARS formula that I feel like I need every palette, but then I'm like, it's kind of like Pat McGrath and Charlotte Tilbury in that everything leans a little bit rosy, whereas I like something a little bit more brown leaning. I still really like a couple of the shades, but I'm like, I don't know that I probably should not have purchased this. The checkered print got me too. We love a checkered print, but I don't know that I need to keep this one beyond this year, to be honest. I think I've done that thing with NARS where like, feel like I collect NARS eyeshadow palettes and face palettes, and it's like, okay, you can still love the brand while not purchasing everything, especially things that are either repetitive in my collection or I'm not like, it's not like most suited to like what I like out of a product. So just a thought. All right, I have 2 Natasha Denona palettes, midi palettes that I've reached for 3 times. So I have the Retro Glam eyeshadow palette. I don't know, I don't feel like this is the, yeah, this is not the original palette. Definitely there's some Retro Glam shades in this palette, but I also feel like this one is a little bit jumbled up. I feel like this would be actually a really fun color story for fall winter, and I like Retro Glam for the fall winter. And then I have the I Need a Warm eyeshadow palette, which is the newest midi palette to launch. I think this is such a beautiful palette. This is definitely likely my favorite midi palette if I were to rank them. I love the warm browns and then like the kind of neutral browns as well. I also feel like there's quite a variety amongst the metallic shimmers. They don't feel super repetitive, so I've been a really big fan of this one. Okay, do not feel like digging through my Pat McGrath palettes and like opening them each up to see which one is what, but I have the Pat McGrath Bronze Seduction and the Pat McGrath, I believe, Subliminal eyeshadow palette. I think I'll post a picture of what I mean. I have those 2 eyeshadow palettes, which I have reached for both 3 times. And then I also have the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 1 eyeshadow palette, which I have reached for 3 times. I haven't yet completed this eyeshadow palette, No Pan Left Behind, and I definitely want to do that before the end of the year, especially just considering how much I love the matte formula. And I feel like this would be a really beautiful, fun, warm, bronzy palette to reach for this fall. So hoping that this one you'll see some more uses on by the end of the year. We are on to the final two palettes in the 3-use category. So we have the Simply Posh Coastal palette, which I have to date reached for 3 total times, and I am still in the testing process for this one. So this one is one that should have more use by the end of the year. And then I also have the Resurgence, the Unearthly Resurgence palette, which I have reached for 3 times this year, and I have finally completed this one, No Pan Left Behind. This is a really beautiful palette. I think the color story is quite unique and quite interesting, and I'm a huge fan of the special shadows throughout this palette. So excited about this one, and I could see myself reaching for this one more before the end of the year as well, just because I love the shade Creation and Solar Symbol. I think they're just really fun shades. So those are all the 3-use eyeshadow palettes. Moving on to 4 uses, we have the ABH Nuevo eyeshadow palette, and this one I've been like unofficially trying to No Pan Left Behind, haven't got there yet, but this is a really beautiful palette. I've actually recently been reaching for this one and created a couple looks with this that I just loved for everyday wear, so I feel like this one's gonna get more use. I also have the Alter Ego Canyon palette, which I did complete No Pan Left Behind earlier this year. Very beautiful, fun, warm, bronzy eyeshadow palette. Would be another good one to reach for this fall. However, I have not yet reached for the Alter Ego Artemis palette, so I'd rather focus on getting some use on that rather than focus my energy on this one, which I've used every shade in already this year. So I don't know if this one will get any more uses before the end of the year, but I suppose we'll see. And then I have the Adept Flying Fiddles eyeshadow palette, which I also feel like I've reached for more than 4 times, but alas, here we are. This released early on this year, and this is such a beautiful palette. I definitely want to pull this one back out for the fall because I just feel like there's some really fun grunginess to this eyeshadow palette. I also love the mauve shades, which I think could be really beautiful for the winter time, so I feel like this one will also get some more use before the year ends. Then we have the ColourPop Limoncello eyeshadow palette, which I have completed No Pan Left Behind, so I'm not 100% certain if this will get more use, again, just because if something has been completed No Pan Left Behind, unless I'm very specifically trying to create a look with the palette, I would like to focus my efforts on other palettes that haven't got as much love, but I love this eyeshadow palette. I also have my Glaminatrix Barely Basic palette, which I've reached for 4 times. This is new this year, but I have officially reached for every single shade in this palette, although this is a really fun one for the fall, so perhaps this one would get some more use. And then I also have the Cosmic Brushes Muse eyeshadow palette, which will get more use because I did roll this in to a project to No Pan Left Behind a second time this year. This is a really beautiful palette. I really love the Cosmic Brushes formula, and I'm honestly excited to continue to reach for this. Next, we have the MAC Encrypted Kryptonite eyeshadow palette. I have reached for this one 4 times. This is a really beautiful, just 6-pan palette. I bought this because I wanted to have MAC Satin Taupe back in my life. Not my favorite, definitely won't be my most reached for little 6-pan, not quad. But nevertheless, I've reached for that 4 times. Same with the Odin's Eye Earthwood eyeshadow palette. I have reached for this 4 total times this year. I've also reached for the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural eyeshadow palette 4 times this year, and I'd like to reach for this one a little bit more this year just because this is like my top favorite palette in my entire collection. I'd be curious how deep the pans are in this palette. This is definitely something that maybe would be fun to try and pan. Also, like, would I get bored of it? I honestly don't know. But this one I've reached for 4 times, and I have completed that No Pan Left Behind. I also have the Odin's Eye Lil Ghost eyeshadow palette, which I have completed No Pan Left Behind, but this is one of those exceptions where I'm like, this is so fitting for spooky season because it is a spooky season palette that I anticipate I will absolutely be reaching for this one some more before we put it away for the year. And then the final palette I've reached for 4 total times is the What's Up Beauty Dragon Eye eyeshadow palette. I've completed this No Pan Left Behind this year. I think it is an absolutely stunning palette. Really beautiful again for the fall, so perhaps I would still reach into this one a few more times. Oh, the shade Myth is like speaking to me at the moment, and I also love Scales for like a really beautiful teal for this time of year, so I wouldn't be surprised if this one got a couple more uses before the year ended. Next up, ABH Jackie. I've only reached for 5 times this year. However, we're starting a new No Pan Left Behind, which I said I would never do again, but here I am doing the things I said I would never ever do. And this is gonna get so much more use before the end of the year, so just wait. Then I have the Bella Beauty Bar Dead Roses eyeshadow palette. This was their Valentine's Day launch. What a fun color story for Valentine's Day. I will say, definitely not a color story that's an everyday reach for me. I reached for it to No Pan Left Behind this, and I really haven't reached for it much since, just because it's, again, not my everyday reach, but I do love Bella Beauty Bar, and I'm very happy to have this in my collection. Do I think I'll reach for this? I honestly may pull this in to reach for like the shade Ew for something grungy this fall, but we'll see, we'll see. I have 3 Ensley Rain palettes I've reached for 5 times. So up first I have the Flourish eyeshadow palette. Such a fun, beautiful color story. I don't want to be super repetitive, but we know how much I love my Ensley Rain eyeshadow palettes. I also have Cold Moon, which we know is absolutely getting more use before the end of the year because this is such a beautiful color story for the fall winter. And then finally, I have the Groovy Gardens eyeshadow palette, which we also know is going to get more use this fall because what a fun, grungy fall color story. And we have the Lethal Cosmetics Wildflower palette, which I did reach for 5 total times. And I'm very happy that I've reached for this one 5 times. I feel like this is a very beautiful palette, but it's definitely something that gives me more springtime vibes. I don't necessarily know I'll reach for this a ton this winter, although there are some fun blues and purples. So maybe, we'll see. Then I also have the NARS Climax palette, which to me is definitely more like grungy fall winter vibes, but I have also completed this No Pan Left Behind. Perhaps I would reach into this a couple more times before the end of the year. We have the Natasha Denona Golden palette, which I have reached for 5 total times. Really beautiful eyeshadow palette as well. I also have the gold palette, so between the two of them, some of the shades overlap, but I still have really enjoyed my time with this. I have the Natasha Denona Glam eyeshadow palette, which I have reached for 5 times. I have completed this No Pan Left Behind, but this is such a beautiful, like, cool toned / neutral everyday palette. I wouldn't be surprised if I reached for that a few more times. And then same with the Natasha Denona Biba palette. I did No Pan Left Behind this palette earlier this year, but I think this is such a beautiful fall color story that I do still want to pull for this a few more times before the year ends. I also have the Natasha Denona Mini Love, which has gotten 5 uses. I do reach into this one for this shade as an inner corner highlight. I do love that. I'm actually surprised I've only reached for this 4 times this year. And then I also have reached into the Natasha Denona Retro palette, sorry, 5 times, 5 times this year. This one looks a little bit different right now just because, again, it's like a custom palette. I actually really love this custom palette, but from the retro palette from Natasha Denona, I have reached for 5 of the shades. Well, I've reached for at least 1 shade from the palette at least 5 times this year. Again, I don't want to dig through my Pat McGrath palettes, but the Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction palette I did reach for 5 times this year. And then the final palette in the 5 use category is my Rowan 1111 quad, which I absolutely love my Rowan quads. I've been also trying to focus on panning / finishing up my 75 degrees quad, so that one has definitely gotten the most attention this year, but I love this and I'm actually kind of ashamed I've only reached for this 5 times. I have 4 eyeshadow palettes in the 6 use category. So up first I have the Bella Beauty Bar Basic Witch eyeshadow palette. I absolutely love this eyeshadow palette. I'm so excited for my other Bella Beauty Bar palettes to arrive, and then I think I will have every palette that I can currently get my hands on from, oh no, I won't because I don't have the really big ones. Anyway, I'm so excited for that one. I love Bella Beauty Bar's formula. Their matte formula is really easy to work with, even though oftentimes it is quite colorful, and their special shifty shades are just so freaking special. I have also reached for the Huda Beauty Wild Tiger eyeshadow palette 6 times. This was going in my No Pan Left Behind, and I've actually really enjoyed reaching for this bronzy shade that kind of has pink glitter flecks running throughout it. I think it's such a beautiful shade, and I'm happy that I've reached for this one 6 times. I also have the Odin's Eye Mighty Monster eyeshadow palette, which has gotten 6 uses from me this year. This has been completed, No Pan Left Behind. And finally, the last palette that has been reached for 6 times is the Unearthly Sorcerer's Smoke eyeshadow palette, and I absolutely anticipate this will get more use this fall winter. So hopefully maybe this one can crack 10 uses. Moving on to 7 uses, we have the Dose of Colors Friendcation eyeshadow palette. This is definitely one I need to set aside to try and pan. This shade cracked and broke on me, but aside from that, I don't have a pan in this palette, even though this has been used so much throughout its life with me. It is definitely older, and I'm definitely close to pan on some of these shades, so I should set this one aside as well. The Sydney Grace Tiny Marvels eyeshadow palette I have reached for 7 times, completed, no pan left behind, and would love to see this one crack at least 10 uses as well this year. I can definitely see myself reaching into this palette for specifically the shade Scarab. Is such a beautiful blue brown shade, and then Web is also a really beautiful inner corner highlight, so perhaps I could focus on that. And then the final 3 in this category are all new palettes to my collection this year and have all been completed, no pan left behind. So up first we have the Lethal Cosmetics Midnight Serenade eyeshadow palette. This is another one I could see myself potentially, I'd love to reach for this at least 3 more times to get 10 uses on the year. And there would be some easy shades to reach for, like Starlit as an inner corner highlight. I love Enchantress for a really beautiful warm pink shade. There's a blue brown shade, there's a deep like taupey bronze in here, so hopefully this one we can crack 10 uses. Then I also have the Diverune Gloomy Gardens eyeshadow palette. This one, I'm not as impressed with the mattes as I am the 5 special shades at the bottom, but the special shades are so intense, holographic, metallic, just absolutely pack a punch on the eyes. So I love this palette for those shadows, and I'd love to see this potentially get, you know, these 7 users, like I'd love to see them get up to 10. And then the final palette in this category is the Moth and Moon palette from Diverune, and again, not as impressed not as impressed in the matte shadows as I am the special shades in this, but oh my goodness, some of the special shades in this one, I love this like kind of holographic purple silver shifty shade. This like white to teal to blue shifty shade is also just so gorgeous. I love this like warm orange peach pink shifty shade. These are some special shades in this palette. All right, we have 4 eyeshadow palettes that have 8 uses. So up first we have Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 3. Would love to see this get at least 10 uses. And honestly, I should focus on this one, hit one more pan in this palette. I did kind of accidentally gouge my nails into this one, which is why there's a pan, and then there is a pan in Polaris. Again, more shallow pan, so would be easier to hit a pan on. Would love to have a 3rd pan in this by the end of the year. Then I have the Diverune Dewdrops palette, which is my favorite from Diverune because it's literally just 6 special shades. Like, we're not even messing around with the mattes. We just have 6 special shades from them. They're stunning, they're gorgeous. I feel like this is another one I should easily be able to hit 10 uses, because even like Splish as like a really beautiful silver inner corner, so pretty. Then I have the Kaleidos Sashimi City eyeshadow palette, which I reached for 8 total times, and do have a pan in this palette. I had to reach for this until I hit a pan. This was going in a project, but we know I absolutely love this palette. It's one of my favorites in my entire collection. And then finally, I have the Rowan Mood Forever quad, which is such a stunner and definitely needs to hit at least 10 before the end of the year. Okay, I don't know where my Too Faced Pumpkin Spice palette is, but that is one of the 2 eyeshadow palettes that I've reached for 9 times. And the second is my Natasha Denona I Need a Nude eyeshadow palette. I have not even completed this one, no pan left behind. I've just reached into this for like a couple of shades here and there. So I would love to see this one, honestly, even get closer to like 15 or 20 uses. Really easy palette to reach into. Would be another one that I could reach into quite frequently for like a lid topper or an inner corner highlight. So hopefully this one increases in use before the end of the year. I have 4 palettes in the 10 use category, and honestly this makes me so happy because I feel like in years past, to even have 1 or 2 above 10 uses, like it didn't happen all that frequently. And now like I'm just happy that we have 4. So up first we have the Too Faced Born This Way Natural Nudes eyeshadow palette. I did complete this no pan left behind, so I don't anticipate I'll reach for this one anymore this year, but I'm honestly so happy that this got 10 uses. And this is definitely a palette I considered potentially decluttering, but reminded myself through no pan left behind just how like useful I think this palette is to have in my collection, especially for just like day-to-day looks. I really enjoyed this palette, so I am glad that has 10 uses. And then the other 3 at 10 uses are all new to my collection this year. So through the testing process, I have the Terra Moon's Space Chemistry palette with 10 uses. I have the Bella Beauty Bar Angles of Illumination eyeshadow palette with 10 uses as well. And this is another one I'm so excited to pull for, especially like in the winter with all these blues. And then finally, I have the Blend Bunny Surge eyeshadow palette with 10 uses, which I have had so much fun playing around with this eyeshadow palette. I will say it's not something that I feel like may get much more use by the end of the year, just because I have so many other eyeshadow palettes that I am trying to reach for and test before the end of the year, and this is definitely not one I'm reaching for like day to day. But I love the neons on the bottom especially. We have no palettes with 11 uses, but I do have the Sigma Corderosa eyeshadow palette with 12 uses. This is another one I did complete, no pan left behind, and I'm so happy that I did. I had so much fun with this one this spring summertime as I was completing this, and I just reminded myself how beautiful I think this palette is. I've not always been the biggest fan of the Sigma eyeshadow formula, but I did really enjoy the Sigma Corderosa eyeshadow palette. Skipping right along to 15 uses, I have the Clrty Cosmetics So Amazing palette, and I will say the majority of those uses came from using the shade right here. This is Don't Be Shellfish, which is such a beautiful, stunning yellow teal shifty shade that I love to use on my inner corner. I do have a pan in this shade, and I will say I do like this palette for its more special shades, but I don't find myself often reaching into it for anything other than like Oh Ship, or Don't Be Shellfish. Nevertheless, 15 uses on this. And then my Ensley Rain Flower Moon eyeshadow palette, I was shocked to see this had 17 uses. I think this is such a beautiful palette, as I do all of my Ensley Rain palettes. I honestly wish we could just cut out the row of mattes and just have this be like an all shimmer palette. I would be perfectly happy with that. There are so many beautiful shades in this palette. I do already have a pan in 2 shades, Persephone and Dahlia. These are definitely more like creamy, like almost like putty like texture, so I wasn't purposely trying to hit a pan, but easier to hit a pan in. And honestly, I feel like I could hit a pan in Sprout before the end of the year, and this is a really beautiful kind of blue ethereal shade, like one of those shades that I love reaching for, so I may set this one aside too to see if we can't hit a pan in this before the end of the year. Okay, we are jumping into the 30s. I was kind of surprised by this, but I probably shouldn't be. With 33 uses, I have the Tartelette In Bloom eyeshadow palette. I have brought this traveling with me every single time I've traveled this year, and on days that I just don't know what I want to do or I'm flying out the door for work, I will reach into Smarty Pants in my lid or in my crease, and that's like it. So I was thinking maybe like 15 to 20 uses, but as I was adding everything up, I was like, dang, I've reached this 33 times. And then right behind that, with 35 uses, I have the Rowan 75 Degrees quad. And this, again, I am focused on this year. Sorry if this is a spoiler for my upcoming Rolling Project 10 pan project, which is the project I'm focused on. I really would just love to hit a pan in the 2 shades that don't have a pan yet before the end of the year. I will say this is definitely getting older in my collection. They are 4 cream shadows, and they're definitely starting to dry out, so I don't know that I'll keep this palette beyond this year. But you guys know I love my Rowan quads, and I've really enjoyed having this in my collection and getting some extra use on it this year. Next up, with 52 uses, it makes me so happy to say that I have used the heck out of my Persona Identity 1 eyeshadow palette. I have completed this palette, no pan left behind. I am actually trying to complete this shade right here, Humble. Fearless, the deep brown shade, fell out and it's no longer, but I loved that shade for my brows, and I have raved about this palette for years and years and years and years on my channel. So I'm so glad to see that this is above 50 uses, and I know I will continue to use this one this year, so I'm excited to see where we end with this one this year. In second place, coming in with 62 uses, I have my Dose of Colors Baked Browns. This was another palette that was going in my These Products Will Self-Destruct, and I either needed to hit pan in all of the shades or complete this lid setting shade, which is exactly what I did. I have also used, like this shade I know I've used a few times this year, but overall 62 uses on this. I would love to know if you can guess what my most used eyeshadow palette on the year is. Pause the video and let me know if you can guess. I feel like definitely some of you are going to absolutely guess this right. Here's a hint, I've used it 162 times. 162 times. Did we think it was going to be my Danessa Myricks Groundworks palette? Now I will say this is not something I even really use as eyeshadow that frequently, but I use the shade Sculpted in my brows literally every day that I do my makeup. So naturally this has got a ton of use. I feel like I'm gonna need, I think you can buy like single pans of each of the shades in here. I absolutely am going to need to purchase a replacement for that shade. I definitely am interested in picking up Groundworks 2. I passed on it this past Sephora VIB, but I really do feel like I would love having that just because I love this palette so much. And even though I don't reach for it every day for like eyeshadow, I love the color story of Groundworks 2. Would I use it every day? I don't know. I really kind of want it though because I love Danessa Myricks so much. Anyway, this is my most used palette and will definitely be my most used palette on the year. I'll be curious to see where we end with total amount of uses on this when we reach the end of the year. But I'm out of breath, roasting hot, and starving because it is now 12:10. It's 80 degrees out, my air is off, and I haven't yet eaten today. So I'm gonna go eat. I'm gonna go for a walk outside, but we're gonna also turn the air on. Anyway, you guys, that is going to wrap up and conclude today's video. Thank you so much for watching, sticking around, supporting me, supporting my channel, supporting Palette Week. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in tomorrow's 6th day of Palette Week. Bye.